everybody. In this video, we're going to be talking about math sentences, and we're going to talk about how math sentences are structured, as well as how you can encourage your students to write math sentences to communicate their understanding of whatever patterns they're looking at. So, first of all, I'd like to start by making an analogy to English sentences. So, in an English sentence, all sentences are split up into two parts. You have the subject of the sentence and the predicate of the sentence, where the subject describes what the sentence is about and the predicate describes what the subject is doing. So, John and his friend run to the store. In this case, John and his friend are the subject of the sentence, and the fact that they're running to the store is the information that's communicated in the predicate. So math sentences have a similar type of a structure where every single math sentence will have two expressions and it will have a relationship that connects those two expressions. So for example, in the equation or math sentence 3 or 2 plus 3 equals 5, 2 plus 3 is one of the expressions, 5 is the other expression, and the relationship between those two expressions is an equal sign. Because if I have two things and I combine them together with 3, that's the same or equal to having 5 things. You can also have other relationships, though. Equals is definitely the most common, but you can have relationships like less than or greater than. So, for example, it would be a true math sentence if I said 8 times 3 is less than 100, because 8 times 3 is 24, and 24 is less than 100. And so that's another example of a math sentence. And one of the most important things when you're communicating with your students about how to write math sentences is to remember that equals is a relationship, because there's a very common misconception that students tend to develop, which is that the equal sign is what you put the answer after. So they'll say things like 7 times 5 equals 35, and the equal sign is just what you put the answer after. Because in a lot of their problems, the number that you put after the equal sign is the answer to the multiplication or the addition or the subtraction that they're solving. But this causes a problem later on, because later on, when you get to algebra and you have complicated expressions on both sides of the equal signs, they don't really understand that what it's communicating is that the left hand side is the same as the right hand side. And so, one of the things that you can do to help your students develop a correct conception of what the equal sign means is you can ask them to write math facts in multiple different ways. So, like for example, you could say, how many ways could you write 7 times 5 is equal to something? Because obviously you can say 7 times 5 equals 35, but you could also say 7 times 5 equals 30 plus 5. Or you could say 7 times 5 equals 17 plus whatever it takes to get to 35. I think that would be, um, oh my goodness, 18, I think. Pretty sure that equals 35. But as long as it does equal 35, then that would also be a true statement. And by writing math sentences like these, it can help the students start to develop a stronger conception of what the equal sign means. And it's also really helpful for them to communicate their mathematical understanding by writing math sentences. So, for example, one way you could do this is by giving them a word problem that they need to figure out, and then having them write out on paper an explanation of how they solved it. So, in this context, you're literally using math sentences in the same way that you would use English sentences, because English sentences are used to communicate ideas, and math sentences should also be used to communicate ideas. They're not just things to memorize. Like we do a lot of memorization of math facts, and you memorize, like, oh, 7 times 8 is 56, and 2 times 8 is 16. And you memorize all these facts. And sometimes students lose sight of the fact that these are actually communicating ideas. And so, by having the students write math sentences to communicate their ideas about how they solved word problems, it can help them realize that these sentences are just ways of communicating our thought processes. They're not just things to memorize. So, for example, in this word problem, if there's 9 monsters and each monster has 5 eyes, and you want to figure out how many eyes they have altogether, um, your students may solve these in different ways. For example, some students might do 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 9 times and figure out what the answer is that way. And when they first start writing their math sentences, they may write them in a mathematically incorrect way, but you can still have a really productive conversation around it. Like, for example, some student might write it like this, and they might say, well, 5 plus 5 equals 10. And then I add 5 to that, which equals 15. Then I add 5 to that, um, which equals 20. And then I add 5 to that, which equals 25. And I've added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of my monster eyes together. So I'll add another one. That's 6. That equals 30 eyes. And then 30 plus 5 equals 35. Plus another 5 equals 40 plus another 5 equals 45. And since I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 monsters, that tells me that there's 45 eyes altogether. And you could use this as an opportunity to help remind students that the equal sign means that the expressions are equal. So, the way that you might have that conversation with this student is you'd say, okay, so what I understand about your strategy based on what you wrote down was that you repeatedly added 5 until you had added 5 9 times. So, like you did 5 plus 5 gives you the 10, then you added another 5 to get 15, then you added another 5 to get 20, and so on. Is that a correct restatement of your process that you use to figure it out? And when the student's like, yeah, that's what I did, then you can say, okay, that's great. And I think that would give you the correct answer of 45 because you added the 5 eyes for each of the 9 monsters. And you can say, now let's take a look at your math sentence and let's look and see if the grammar of your math sentence is correct. And you can call it that. Like, I don't know if that's a technical thing or not, but they should be familiar with the idea of grammar from your English classes. And you can use that context to help them correct their mathematical notation. And you could say, okay, so when you did 5 plus 5 equals 10, that's true because 5 plus 5 does equal 10. But when you added on the extra 5, you made this, and is this expression really equal this expression? And then they'll be like, oh, like, no, no, like 5 plus 5 doesn't equal 10 plus 5. That's not true. And you could say, yeah, that's not true because 10 plus 5 is 15 and 5 plus 5 is 10. But we could still write out your thought process. We would just write it with different grammar. And you could show them that another way they could write their thought process, I'll do this in green to show that it's correct. Their thought process, I'll do this in green to show that it's correct, is they could say 5 plus 5 equals 10. And then they take that 10 and add 5 to get 15. And then 15 plus 5 gives them 20. And 20 plus 5 gives them 25. And 25 plus 5 equals 30. And so on and so forth until they get to 45. And that could be an accurate way of describing what their process was. So that's an example of how you could use the process of writing math sentences to, first of all, help the students describe what their thought process is, and then to refine their process of expressing it so that they're using mathematically correct notation to express their ideas. And you'll see lots of examples of this in the case studies where the teachers ask the students to write math sentences and then they look at how the students responded to the prompts. Um, so you'll see lots of examples of that, but I would encourage you in your math classes to ask the students to write out their thoughts and to explain their thoughts in math sentences. And it's okay if the students make notational errors. That's normal, that's totally fine. If you introduce it as like kind of like the idea that math sentences have grammar just like English sentences do, then you can have conversations about how to more clearly express their ideas. I also wanted to make one quick little note, and that is don't be afraid to overuse parentheses when you're having the students write their math sentences. Like for example, if a student was thinking about, I don't know, let's say 5 times 12, and they didn't have this fact memorized yet. So they thought about it as 5 times 10 plus 5 times 2. Technically, that is an accurate math sentence because the order of operations says you multiply first and then add. However, it wouldn't be a bad thing to put parentheses around the multiplication just to make it extra clear that that's happening first. So even if a statement would be correct without parentheses, don't be afraid to overuse parentheses if it would make the expression clearer for the students, especially because order of operations isn't usually introduced until I think sixth grade, maybe. I don't remember exactly when it's introduced, but it is later. So, especially in the earlier grades, make sure that you do use parentheses to communicate which calculations are done first. So, that's it for this video. If you have any questions, let me know, and I hope you have a good day.